Good morning. It's Torte de Lini. Before I start, I just wanted to apologize if I sound a little off or tired. I've been ill for the past week after returning from Taipei, still suffering, and this video is a bit late, but still relatively relevant to the meta. In recent videos, I talked a lot about how core heroes with the capability to move around in fights were leading in the meta, like Puck, Faces Void, Slark. These kind of heroes can kind of weave in and out of fights, shrugging off debuffs, avoiding attacks, and being able to jump back into engagement to finish enemies off. What I failed to mention is that all this means is late game team fights last usually much longer than usual, and that is also becoming a part of this shifting meta, or another half of the shifting meta. So for example, heroes like, it's a little outdated now, but Dragonite are still very popular because he's a bit of a showstopper. He kind of stops the jumpy kind of heroes in the tracks with his Dragon Tail stun. His ultimate ability lasts a pretty long time, in line with how long team fights are becoming more and more. And his range physical damage output with his Frost Slow, Splash, and damage over time debuffs just kind of cuts right through all the jumping around nonsense, because at the end of the day, the enemy either has to confront this big tanky damage dealer or they lose a tower. It's kind of just that simple when you're playing what is essentially is a fixed point of your draft lineup. This is kind of why I like talking about this hero Lifestealer, and why it's considered a very popular position 1 carry in this patch. He's very malleable depending on the lineup, but the simple summary, at least as an initial jumping point, is that in 7.35c, a lot of the hero's itemization was really accentuated, giving him a lot of legs to grow, outlive, and ultimately outdamage most enemies, no matter how long fights are. It's not just the items that kind of make him good, it's how Lifestealer kind of counters a lot of popular other items and heroes that have kind of blossomed in 7.35c, like Sven was one, and still is, I think, a lot less in 7.35d. Phantom Assassin was also another very popular one in 7.35c, where with Revenant's Brooch, but with Lifestealer's Rage, obviously that magic damage from Revenant's Brooch is negated, since Rage gives 80% of magic resistance. I'll get to that in a bit, but if we actually look at Dream League real quick, we can actually see that Lifestealer is still being picked the second most, right under Sven, while in Dota 2 Pro Tracker, I think we can see that Lifestealer is number 2 picked, right below Faces Void, and Faces Void is kind of a response to Lifestealer, as well as Morphling, and we'll get to that in a bit. I think the hero that's boasting a pretty high pick rate and acceptable win rate probably has something noteworthy to discuss and look forward into. I really love Lifestealer as a hero myself, but I think I'm one of the rare few that do. So if we actually look at 7.35, we can actually see that Lifestealer hasn't really received much changes that really justifies talking to it further, right? You know, he's got a little bit in 7.35. We saw that they reduced the rage movement speed a little bit. We saw that 7.34d a little bit better on the feast. Talents were mixed up in 7.34. Not really much to go off on. No, I think the discussion that has to be had here is talking more about the items in 7.35c that really show us something is amiss in terms of heroes that are growing popular, right? We look at 7.35, we can see 2 of Lifestealer's main items have grown in value. We see 1, Radiance, the evasion bonus increased from 15 to 20%. Now don't forget, Radiance also applies a mischance to anyone that is being burned by Radiance. And then the more important aspect is Sanji, which we know has great synergy with Lifestealer and his lifesteal component. That's also gotten better, where the status resistance is higher at 16, and then 25 for Sanji and Yasha, plus better health regen and lifesteal amp bonus, which again, Lifestealer really loves experiencing that. It's a great fight, by the way. So all that said, what's there to really talk about when it comes to Lifestealer? Well, I mean, besides the fact that Lifestealer's 2 items have gotten cheaper or give better offerings than they were before, the hero also was kind of the beneficiaries of Shiva's Guard getting nerfed, or rather Shiva's Guard becoming so expensive that the timing of which it comes online is completely past when Lifestealer likes to come online, which is mid-game, similar to Sven. Shiva's guard obviously slowed him down. It reduced his attack speed and lifesteal, and it forced him to use rage. Because otherwise he would take amplified damage, and losing that lifesteal would be pretty harmful for a hero that's called Lifestealer. So not only was that a grand opening for Lifestealer to be more considered in professional and public matches, but it's actually not just the items that made Lifestealer stronger, so notably popular. You also have to realize that kind of like what we talked about with Sven, the most popular offlaners also usually lose to Lifestealer from the very beginning. Mars, Centaur, Warrunner. These heroes can't really handle Lifestealer's persistence in the laning stage with his Ghoul Frenzy and Orb of Corrosion Slow and Feast that does increased damage, since they're all high health melee heroes, right? Even Dragonite doesn't really want to be in the lane where, you know, he gets double bracer and has health regen from Dragon Blood that's then mitigated by an Orb of Corrosion chomping me down by the legs. Lifestealer, right? If we check out Lifestealer's item builds here, we can see Orb of Corrosion is probably the third most, if not the most popular item to pick up early game for Lifestealer. Gives him some great stats, gives him some attack speed until he can get his Ghoul Frenzy up in more levels, and more importantly, it reduces the health regen, so the sustainability, or rather the comfort and the stability of the lane for offlaners like a Mars, like a Dragonite, like a Centaur Warrunner is put at risk, especially when you have a great support hero to set up kills with Lifestealer, who can pretty much stay at the heel of most heroes, or at least most offlane melee strength heroes. So all that said, if we actually look at what we also talk about in terms of counters, if we look at Dream League once more time, we can see one more reason Lifestealer is very popular. And it's because the #1 picked hero, Sven, is directly countered by Lifestealer. I already did a video about Sven on this channel, but I essentially summarized Sven by saying that Sven relies on Black King Bar to consistently deal damage in a short period of time. Lifestealer with his Ag Scepter can infest Sven even when Black King Bar is active to deal damage and disarm him and cause Sven to miss his attacks from the Radiance Burn. That Radiance is significant as it forces Sven and other heroes to kind of buy items with True Strike early in the mid game instead of items they need like Ag Scepter to stay on top of their opponents and Black King Bar for Sven specifically. So really Lifestealer came out of this because Sven was growing very popular in, let's say, Dream League, and now also was seen replicated in public matches. And then Lifestealer with the buffs in 7.35C plays really well against strength heroes, evidently, especially high health strength heroes like Sven. Plays in the mid game similar to Sven, but more importantly can counter him by just infesting him whenever Sven wants to fight at a low cooldown of 20 seconds. Makes Lifestealer kind of the pinnacle blossoming of a moving meta, as we talk about in the 7.35 patch arc. And it's nice to see that, right? I love seeing a meta morph and change in real time and being able to talk about it. Like, it's like watching a butterfly blossom, right? It's like watching a caterpillar go from the caterpillar to cocoon to a butterfly, and then starts to cycle again as a new patch comes out. So another key thing that we had to talk about with Lifestealer that I kind of missed the point on is that even magic-based right-click heroes are kind of countered, or rather are less effective against Lifestealer, as his rage comes with 80% magic resistance. That's 30% more than Black King Bar, which he also sometimes buys on top. So let's say you're considering buying a Revenant's Brooch. You're kind of caught in a dilemma where either you buy Revenant's Brooch, not that popular now, and then you get stalled by Lifestealer with Rage and then BKB, and your damage is mitigated, or you don't buy Revenant's Brooch, you keep your damage as purely physical, and watch how Lifestealer buys Assault Cuirass to then up his defenses against your physical damage. It really creates a dilemma where, you know, Lifestealer can kind of respond to every single damage output that the enemy might want to start dishing out in the mid to late game. So ultimately it comes down to the question of what are Lifestealer's itemization? What is his build? And for starters, we always talked about it. One is Bracer and Orb of Corrosion for that early game last hitting and deterrence against Bracer, buying high health regeneration heroes like Centaur and Dragonite. Phase Boot for that much needed armor, as well as to close the gap. Armlet for fantastic stats on a hero that lifesteals back any health he loses from the item's downside. It's also just a great item to hold on to that you can farm to build your next most important item, Radiance. And this also hastens your farm for the reasons we named above. Sanjay and Yasha to close the gap on enemies, the status resistance and lifesteal implication, which we pointed out in the patch. And then the two items that we see a lot of pros buy are Ag Shard. If you don't remember what Ag Shard does, it's called Open Wounds, and Open Wounds basically applied a big slow from afar. So it was kind of a way to catch opponents for Lifestealer. You would cast Open Wounds on them, they would be slowed, then you close that gap. It also did additional damage based on their health, as well as additional lifesteal value for you. So it was like kind of like a mini satanic that you applied on the enemy that you gained a lot back. The Ag Shard again helps close the gap on enemies with its slow and massive lifesteal, which is then amplified again by Sanji. So we see a lot of synergy already. And then Ag Scepter is, we'll call it the coup de grace, we'll call it the cherry on top, the pièce de résistance. Ag Scepter is kind of used to stall and counter enemy position 1 carries. We might be able to see it right here, it would be really nice. So here he goes hard on someone, just clobbers them. Now it looks like he doesn't need it, or he's saving it for the Aegis. So Ag Scepter, you know, again, runs out the enemy's Black King bar duration while also massively regenerating your health, which is amplified by Sanji. See, disarmed. And if you need it, you can also get a Black King bar, which we talked about, for even more stalling and debuff immunity. And you can kind of see here, this fight was incredibly long. It lasted a full Aegis and more, and Lifestealer was able to escape that on top of all of it. It's kind of nuts. The only real fear that I think Lifestealer has is silence, and it's kind of why sometimes you see a lot of players pick up a Black King bar, even though Lifestealer comes with his own, you know, Black King bar called Rage, is that Lifestealer relies on that Rage heavily, and so he needs a backup Rage, so to speak, to ensure that he can pop his Rage whenever he's needed. And evidently heroes like Grimstroke that deal silence, or anyone that buys an Orchid, kind of shut down Lifestealer pretty badly, because it prevents him, one, it gets to jump on you, and two, it prevents you from being able to shrug that off or get out of that situation where you'll ultimately probably just die. In any case, yeah. So in short, as mentioned, the longer the fight goes, the better it is for Lifestealer, who is always kind of applying pressure. In a way, the hero is similar to a Puck or a Slark, in that Lifestealer is looking to make the fights go long, and has so many tools to kind of extend it as long as possible with his presence during those engagements, which translates into Radiance constantly dealing burn damage on top of his own physical damage output that scales from the Feast's max health bonus damage percentage. And already you can see kind of in your head, you know, not only is Lifestealer kind of playing the same game as the Puck or the Slark, where the game is going long, as similar as what they do when they try to avoid damage or when they jump in and out of fights, but more importantly, he's also playing the game of mixed damage, like a Faceless Void, where Faceless Void does, you know, physical damage with his attack, he does magical damage with Maelstrom and Time Bash, and then on top of that, he's also got his Chronosphere to hold opponents for a long time to make the fights last as long as his Chronosphere does, or 2 Chronospheres in his Refresher. For Lifestealer, he's got 2 mixed damage, right? He does the burn damage, he does the infest damage with Open Wounds, if it's relevant here, I can't recall. And then he also does the physical damage that's enhanced by Feast max health percentage, which scales very well, right? So basically, as I said, Lifestealer is making the fights go as long as possible, and he uses those tools to make it happen. If you look at Lifestealer's sequence and fights here, hopefully we'll start seeing it. He kind of uses Phase Boots and Open Wounds and maybe Sanjay and Yasha to close the gap on enemies. If he doesn't have, let's say, a Magnus, or if he doesn't have, let's say, a Storm Spirit to kind of start that fight up for him. And then he just starts dealing huge damage. And the moment he starts being targeted, except for here, he pops Rage for 6 seconds. And after that, he uses Infest to disarm an enemy for another 5 seconds. Then he pops Open Wounds again while activating Black King Bar for another 9 to 6 seconds. And then, believe it or not, Rage is off cooldown for you again to pop it one more time. So that's like 23 to 26 seconds, assuming all goes well, of Radiance burn. And Lifestealer's physical damage output and non-targetable debuff immunity just makes it all the more difficult during those 23 to 26 seconds to keep him down, when he can always get life through Open Wounds and Feast. Simply put, Lifestealer wants to kind of stay alive, and given his name starts with life, he's pretty successful at it, at least in this patch. Now, with that said, in 7.35D, which I do have to talk about, and no, I didn't just write this, we can see the developers added some nerfs to Lifestealer that make it worth talking about. It makes him a bit more easier to handle, right? His Ag Scepter Infest doesn't reach as far. His Open Wounds and his Rage are a bit slower, or again, don't reach as far. These are massive and kind of help give enemies the ability to better kite, distance, and play around Lifestealer. And more importantly, don't make it so Lifestealer can so easily start things up or so easily catch and hold the enemy from such a significant distance, so to speak. With Lifestealer's popularity kind of growing and Savent's pick rate also starting to diminish, counters like, Face of Void are prevailing. Face of Void has always been in the mix for a while. He's coming up again as we kind of go full circle in this Pause 1 meta patch. And Morphling is also a unique hero that I'm seeing a lot more of in this meta, because Morphling 1 can build Orchid, which again the silence is an issue for Lifestealer, and 2, Morphling has very low health but very high armor, which is the perfect mix for a hero that wants to deal with Lifestealer, who relies on heroes having higher health to be able to deal a lot of damage with his Feast Max passive. Is he going to use Infest here? This is kind of what I was talking about. Look at that stalling. Ooh, that Abyssal is another great way of stalling. That's a good idea. Look at that. Look at him go. Bummer, but that was fantastic. Anyway, to conclude and to wrap it all up, Lifestealer is meta right now because we have a mid-game fighting hero, right? The games are moving less from late game to more mid-game. That is favorable in a lot of early game matchups and popular carries. He counters most of the best heroes and items late game and comes with a lot of necessary defenses that other heroes can't compensate for, like status resistance from Sanji or evasion and mischance from Radiance. Lifestealer is amplified with Sanji again, magic resistance and debuff immunity with Rage, and a disengage tool with Infest, which can also become a disarm against enemy carries, or even a nuke if you want to use it as a finisher to kill someone off. While many position 1 carries need to do a lot of fancy footwork to survive team fights, Lifestealer kind of looks to stall until the enemies are dead. That's it. Thanks again and have a good morning.